It was Palm Sunday, April 11th, 1965. A normal morning, peaceful, quiet. Families across the Midwest were slipping into their Sunday best, straightening ties, smoothing dresses, preparing for church. Children giggled in back seats. Church bells echoed through small towns. The air smelled like fresh rain and spring soil, but above them, something else was gathering, something invisible, something deadly, a monster, spinning, growing, waiting. By the end of that day, more than 50 tornadoes would tear across 6 states, carving a path of total devastation nearly 300 miles long. 266 people would be dead. Thousands more, injured, entire communities, erased. And yet, most people today have never heard this story. This is the tale of the forgotten super outbreak. The day the sky fell on Palm Sunday, and the hidden lessons that still echo today. Let me take you back. Picture it. Sunday morning, April 11th. The sun is climbing over Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio. Frost still clings to the grass in some places because March had been brutal. Snow, ice, cold that wouldn't let go. But now it's different. The air feels softer, warmer, almost muggy. In thousands of homes, families are getting ready. Mothers are buttoning coats. Fathers are checking their watches. Kids are complaining about having to sit still for an hour. It's Palm Sunday, one of the holiest days in the Christian calendar, the day Jesus entered Jerusalem. Churches are expecting packed pews. In Goshen, Indiana, a small city in Elkhart County, families stream into white-steepled churches. The organ plays. Hymns rise. Faith fills the air. In Michigan, along the shores of Coldwater Lake and Lake Pleasant, cottage owners are opening up their summer homes for the season, excited for warmer days ahead. In Ohio, in tiny Pittsfield, population 50, the community gathers in their modest church, praying, singing, together. Nobody suspects that within hours, their worlds will be shattered. Nobody knows that the atmosphere above them is coiling like a spring, ready to explode. But the sky knew. The sky was telling a very different story. See, March 1965 had been cold, abnormally cold. Snow buried the Midwest under heavy blankets of white. Winter refused to release its grip. And then, suddenly, everything changed. Warm air, humid air, surged up from the Gulf of Mexico like a flood. Temperatures that had been in the 30s and 40s rocketed into the 60s and 70s overnight. The jet stream, that massive river of wind high in the atmosphere, buckled. It twisted. It created a battleground where cold Canadian air slammed head-on into the warm southern moisture. Meteorologists call this a perfect setup. The ingredients were all there. Instability, wind shear, moisture, lift. It was a bomb waiting for a spark. On April 10th, the day before, Palm Sunday, a vigorous extratropical cyclone began spinning up over the high plains. Storm systems started popping up across the southern plains overnight. By early morning on April 11th, the atmosphere was primed, loaded, ready. Now, here's the thing. The Weather Bureau, the predecessor to today's National Weather Service. They saw it coming. Meteorologists watched those weather maps. They saw the fronts colliding. They saw the instability. And they did issue warnings. Tornado watches went out. Bulletins were released. But here's the problem. In 1965, the tornado warning system was primitive. The terminology was confusing. Most people didn't understand the difference between a watch and a warning. A watch meant conditions were favorable. A warning meant a tornado was happening. But the public, they didn't get it. And even if they did, how would they hear about it? No smartphones, no weather apps, no instant alerts buzzing in your pocket. You had 3 options: radio, television, or a phone call. That's IT. And on Palm Sunday morning, most people were in church, where radios were off, TVs were dark, and phones sat silent on kitchen walls. So, when the Weather Bureau issued that tornado watch at 1:45 p.m. Central Time, covering parts of Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio, most people never heard it. They sat in pews, they sang hymns, they bowed their heads in prayer, completely unaware that death was spinning toward them at 70 miles per hour. Around 3 p.m. Central Time, the first supercell thunderstorm roared across eastern Iowa. It was massive, towering. A vertical empire of cloud and fury, reaching 50,000 feet into the sky. And as it crossed into Illinois, it gave birth. The first tornado touched down northwest of Rockford, Illinois. Then another. Then another. These weren't weak twisters. These were violent. F3, F4 intensity. Winds exceeding 200 miles per hour. They chewed through farmland, ripped barns apart like cardboard, tossed cars like toys. Near Crystal Lake, Illinois, homes exploded. One moment they stood solid and proud. The next moment, gone, just foundations and splinters. People who saw it said the funnel was huge, dark, roaring like a freight train times 1,000. And this was just the beginning, because the atmospheric machine was just getting started. By 6:30 p.m. Central Time, the worst was yet to come. A monster of a tornado, rated F4, was bearing down on northern Indiana, near the town of Dunlap, just outside Goshen. There was a place called the Midway Trailer Court, mobile homes, families, kids playing outside in the strange, warm evening air. And then, someone looked up, and they saw 2 funnels, twin tornadoes, side by side, writhing, churning, descending from the belly of a supercell, like the fingers of God reaching down to crush the earth. A photographer, his name lost to history, captured the moment. The image is haunting, 2 dark columns against a sickly green sky, beautiful and terrifying. One survivor later said, and you can hear the trauma in their voice even decades later. I looked up and saw 2 funnels, black as night, spinning, and then the world turned to black. The tornado, or tornadoes, we're still not entirely sure, slammed into the Midway Trailer Court at 6:32 p.m. Mobile homes don't stand a chance against 200-mile-per-hour winds. They never do. Trailers were shredded, ripped apart. Families inside were thrown, tossed, buried under debris. When it was over, 22 people in that trailer park were dead. 22 souls, gone in seconds. Among them, entire families, parents, children, grandparents. The tornado was so violent, so vicious, that some victims were found hundreds of feet from where their homes had stood. Personal belongings, photos, clothes, toys were scattered across miles. But the storm didn't stop. It kept moving, kept destroying. Here's what made this outbreak so uniquely catastrophic. Speed. These supercells, these tornadic thunderstorms, were racing across the landscape at 70 miles per hour. Some estimates say even faster. That's highway speed. Imagine trying to outrun a tornado. That's moving as fast as you can drive. You can't. And these weren't just fast. They were huge. Some of the tornadoes that day were more than a mile wide. 1, possibly 2 miles across. For context, most tornadoes are a few hundred feet wide. These were beasts, giants. And because they were moving so fast and hitting during the late afternoon and evening, when visibility was dropping and people were at home, the death toll climbed. Fast. The storms were also doing something else. Something meteorologists didn't fully understand yet. They were producing multiple tornadoes simultaneously. One supercell would have 2, sometimes 3 tornadoes on the ground at the same time. This phenomenon, called satellite tornadoes or multi-vortex tornadoes, was barely documented in 1965. Scientists like Tetsuya Fujita, The man who would later create the Fujita scale for rating tornado intensity would study this outbreak to understand how and why this happens. Inside a massive tornado, smaller suction vortices can form. These are like mini tornadoes within the main funnel, spinning around the center, each one capable of extreme damage. That's why, in tornado aftermath photos, you'll see one house obliterated, and the house right next door barely touched. It's not luck, it's physics, it's those suction vortices. And on Palm Sunday, 1965, the Midwest was a laboratory for this deadly phenomenon. While Indiana was being ravaged, Michigan was getting hit at Lake Pleasant, at Coldwater Lake, in Branch County. Another F4 tornado, possibly even stronger, was carving a path of total destruction. This tornado was enormous. Reports suggest it was up to 2 miles wide. 2 miles wide. Imagine looking out your window and seeing a wall of darkness that stretches from horizon to horizon. That's what people saw. Cottages along the lakes, gone, boats, tossed hundreds of feet inland like toys in a bathtub, trees, ancient oaks and maples, snapped like toothpicks or ripped out of the ground, roots and all. A weather instrument at the lake recorded a wind gust of 151 miles per hour before the instrument was destroyed. That record, Redike, stood until 1991. Churches were hit. The walls collapsed. Pews were buried. Hymnals scattered across fields. One pastor later described, and his voice shook as he spoke. "We heard the roar. We thought it was a train. But trains don't sound like that. Trains don't make the AIR feel like it's being sucked away. We dropped to the floor and prayed. And when we stood up, the church was gone. Just gone." Families who had been enjoying a peaceful Sunday by the lake, preparing for Easter the following week, were now running for their lives. Some made it to basements, some huddled in bathtubs, some didn't make it at all. The tornado moved fast, too fast to process, too fast to react. By the time you saw it, it was already too late. And then, as if things couldn't get worse, night fell. Tornadoes in daylight are terrifying. You can see them, you can track them, you can try to get out of the way. But tornadoes at night, they're invisible. You don't see the funnel. You just hear the roar, feel the wind, and then impact. By 11 p.m. Central Time, the storm system had pushed east into Ohio. In Pittsfield, a tiny community in Lorain County with a population of about 50 people. The tornado struck at 11:12 p.m. Imagine, you're in bed. It's dark. You're exhausted from the day. Maybe you heard something on the radio earlier about storms, but it's been hours. You think it's over. And then you hear it, that sound, that roar, like 1,000 trains, like the earth splitting open. You jump out of bed. You run. But where? Where do you go? The tornado was on them before they could even think. Homes exploded. The small community center flattened. Trees that had stood for a century, gone. One survivor said, "One moment it was quiet, just wind and rain, and the next, all I could see was black and trees inside the house. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was dead." In nearby Strongsville, another tornado touched down. More homes destroyed, more lives shattered, and here's the worst part. Many people in Ohio never got the warning, because by this point, the communication system had collapsed. Phone lines, down. Snapped by earlier tornadoes, blown away by winds. Power lines, down. Entire counties were in the dark. Radio stations, offline. No electricity meant no broadcasts. The Weather Bureau was trying. They were issuing warnings, updating forecasts, begging people to take shelter. But the message wasn't getting through. This was before NOAA weather radio, before emergency alert systems, before outdoor tornado sirens were standard in every town. If you didn't have a battery-powered radio, if you didn't happen to be listening at the exact right moment, you had no idea. And even if you did hear a warning, What did it mean? Tornado watch in effect. Okay. Watch for what? Does that mean one is coming? Is it here? What do I do? The terminology was confusing, the public wasn't educated, and the infrastructure was failing. This is why so many people died, not because they were careless, not because they were stupid, but because the system designed to protect them failed them. The 1965 Palm Sunday outbreak was a wake-up call, a tragedy that would eventually force change. But on that night, as the death toll climbed, as rescue crews scrambled in the darkness, as families dug through rubble looking for loved ones, that change felt like cold comfort. When dawn broke on April 12th, the scale of the disaster became clear. Entire neighborhoods, gone. Just slabs and debris fields. In Dunlap, Indiana, where the Midway trailer court had stood, there was nothing. Just twisted metal, shattered wood. Personal belongings scattered like confetti. Rescue crews arrived, volunteers, neighbors, strangers who just wanted to help. They dug, they searched, they called out names, hoping for answers. Sometimes, they found survivors, trapped under rubble, injured, in shock, but alive. Those moments, those rescues, they were miracles, small lights in an ocean of darkness, but too often, they found bodies. One 6-year-old girl, now an elderly woman, remembers that dawn. She remembers the smell, gasoline, wet wood, earth. She remembers the sounds, voices calling, crying, praying. She remembers her mother holding her tight and whispering, "We're alive, we're alive, that's all that matters." But for so many others, there was no dawn, no second chance, no miracle. 266 people, dead. Some sources say 271, over 1,500 injured, thousands homeless. Communities across 6 states, devastated. The monetary damage, adjusted for inflation, exceeded $1 billion. But you can't put a price on loss, on grief, on the hole left behind when someone you love is just gone. 55 confirmed tornadoes in less than 17 hours across 6 states. Some of those tornadoes were on the ground for more than 30 miles, carving continuous paths of destruction. At least 7 tornadoes were rated F4, devastating damage. Winds between 200 and 260 miles per hour. One possibly reached F5 intensity. Incredible damage. Winds over 260 miles per hour. Total obliteration. When historians and meteorologists look back at tornado outbreaks, they rank them by death toll, by number of tornadoes, by intensity. The 1965 Palm Sunday outbreak is the 4th deadliest tornado outbreak in U.S. history. 4th. Let that sink in. And yet, ask someone on the street today about tornado outbreaks, and they'll mention Joplin, Moore, Oklahoma, the super outbreak of 1974. But 1965? Silence. It's been forgotten. Why? But before we answer that question, let me tell you about a man who refused to let these deaths be meaningless. A man who turned tragedy into understanding, who transformed loss into progress. His name was Tetsuya Theodore Fujita. And if you've ever heard of the Fujita scale, that F scale that rates tornado intensity from F0 to F5, then you already know this man's legacy. But in 1965, Fujita was still building his reputation. He was a professor at the University of Chicago, a researcher, a scientist with an obsession with understanding the physics of destruction. Born in Japan, Fujita had witnessed the aftermath of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He had studied the blast patterns, the way destruction radiates from a center point, the way buildings fail under extreme force, and when he heard about the Palm Sunday outbreak, when he saw the photographs of the devastation, he knew he had to investigate. So, Fujita packed his bags, grabbed his cameras, his notebooks, his measuring tools, And he traveled to the Midwest. He walked through the rubble of Dunlap, Indiana, through the shattered remains of Lake Pleasant, Michigan, through the scattered debris fields of Ohio. He took thousands of photographs. He interviewed survivors. He measured debris scatter. He examined foundation damage. He calculated wind speeds based on structural failure. He was meticulous, obsessive, driven by a need to understand. And what he found changed the science of meteorology forever. See, one thing puzzled him. In the tornado paths, especially in places where the most violent tornadoes had struck, the damage was inconsistent, almost random. One house would be completely obliterated, foundations swept clean, every board, every brick, every trace of human habitation gone, just bare earth and a few scattered fragments. But the house right next to it, maybe it lost its roof, maybe some walls collapsed, maybe the windows shattered, but it was still standing. How was that possible? If a tornado is just a single column of rotating wind, a giant drill bit boring through the landscape, shouldn't the damage be more uniform, more predictable? Why would one house be erased while its neighbor survived? Luck? Divine intervention? Random chance? No. Fujita realized it was something else, something the scientific community hadn't fully documented yet. These massive tornadoes, these F4 and F5 monsters, they weren't single vortices. They were multiple vortices, mini tornadoes, spinning within the main tornado, orbiting around the center like planets around a sun, like satellites around the Earth. He called them suction vortices. And these were the real killers. Picture this. A massive tornado, half a mile wide, maybe a mile wide, moving across the landscape. Inside that main circulation, 2, 3, sometimes 4 smaller vortices. Each one maybe 50 to 100 feet across, spinning at incredible speeds. Each suction vortex could have wind speeds of 200, 250 miles per hour, maybe more. And they would orbit around the center of the main tornado, touching down, lifting up, touching down again, creating multiple paths of extreme damage within the broader damage path. That's why the damage looked so random. That's why one house was obliterated while its neighbor survived. It wasn't luck. It was physics. It was structure. It was the geometry of destruction. If a suction vortex passed directly over your house, you were done. Total obliteration. If it passed 50 feet to the side, you might survive with severe damage, but the structure would stand. Fujita's discovery, his documentation of these suction vortices, revolutionized tornado science. But he didn't stop there. His work on the Palm Sunday outbreak, combined with his later studies of the 1974 super outbreak, led directly to the creation of the Fujita scale in 1971. For the first time, meteorologists had a standardized, objective way to rate tornado intensity based on the damage they caused. F0, light damage, broken branches, damage signs. F1, moderate damage, roofs peeled off, mobile homes pushed off foundations. F2, considerable damage, roofs torn off frame houses, large trees snapped. F3, severe damage, roofs and walls torn off well-constructed houses, trees debarked. F4, devastating damage, well-constructed houses leveled, cars thrown. F5, incredible damage, strong frame houses lifted off foundations and carried considerable distances. Total obliteration. This scale is still used today. Well, technically the enhanced Fujita scale, updated in 2007 to account for modern construction and more damage indicators. But the foundation, the concept, the framework, that came directly from Fujita's work after Palm Sunday, 1965. And the scientific breakthroughs didn't stop there. The outbreak also taught meteorologists about supercell thunderstorms. These rotating thunderstorms, these monsters with updrafts so powerful they could lift cars, were capable of producing tornadoes that stayed on the ground for miles. for hours. They could produce multiple tornadoes simultaneously. They could race across the landscape at highway speeds, understanding supercells. Their structure, their behavior, their life cycle meant understanding how to predict them, how to warn for them, how to save lives. Today, when a meteorologist looks at radar and sees a hook echo, that distinctive curve in the precipitation pattern that indicates a rotating supercell, they know a tornado is likely. That knowledge, that understanding, it was built on the research that came out of Palm Sunday. Every tornado warning you've ever received on your phone, every time a meteorologist points to radar and says, "This is a dangerous storm," every weather forecast that told you to take shelter, they all trace back, in part, to what was learned from the devastation of April 11th, 1965. Fujita's legacy is written in the lives saved, in the warnings issued, in the science that turned chaos into something we could understand, and maybe survive. But here's the hard truth. Knowledge alone doesn't save lives. You can understand tornado physics. You can have the best scientists in the world. You can know that a tornado is coming. But if you can't get that information to the people, if you can't tell them, take shelter now, then what's the point? And after Palm Sunday, after 266 people died, despite warnings being issued, despite meteorologists knowing that conditions were favorable, the U.S. government and the Weather Bureau realized something had to change. The system was broken. Not because the meteorologists were incompetent, not because they didn't care, but because the infrastructure, the communication system, the way warnings were delivered, it was inadequate for the reality of modern severe weather. So they made changes, big changes. In 1966, just 1 year after the outbreak, the U.S. Weather Bureau made a critical decision. They introduced new terminology, 2 terms, that we now take for granted, but at the time were revolutionary: tornado watch and tornado warning. Before this, the language was vague, confusing. Tornado forecast, tornado possibility, tornado alert, terms that meant different things in different offices, different regions, different contexts. The public had no idea what they were supposed to do. But now, the definitions were clear, standardized, national. A tornado. Watch meant conditions are favorable for tornadoes. The ingredients are in place. The atmosphere is primed. Be alert. Be ready. Have a plan. Know where your shelter is. A tornado warning meant a tornado has been spotted on the ground or detected on radar. It is happening right now. Take shelter immediately. Your life is in danger. This is not a drill. Simple, clear, direct. No ambiguity, no confusion. Watch means be ready. Warning means take shelter. This change, this clarification of language, saved lives, countless lives. But the reforms didn't stop there. Civil defense sirens. Those outdoor warning sirens you hear during tornado drills. Those loud, wailing alarms that make your chest vibrate. They became standard across the Midwest and tornado-prone regions. Before 1965, only some towns had them, and they were mostly for nuclear attack warnings, a holdover from the Cold War, a relic of duck-and-cover drills and fears of Soviet missiles. But after Palm Sunday, after seeing how many people died because they never heard a warning, communities invested in sirens, lots of them, strategically placed throughout towns to ensure maximum coverage. When a tornado warning is issued now, in most communities, those sirens wail. You can hear them from miles away. They're loud, they're piercing, they're designed to be heard over the wind, over the rain, over the sound of your TV or your conversation or your life. They're impossible to ignore. And then there was NOAA weather radio. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration established a dedicated radio frequency, broadcasting weather information and warnings 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You could buy a weather radio, relatively cheap. Keep it in your home, your business, your school, and it would sit there silently, monitoring the frequency until a warning was issued for your area. Then, it would scream an alarm, a tone, an automated voice telling you exactly what was happening and what you needed to do. No need to keep the TV on. No need to keep checking the radio. No need to remember to stay informed. The radio would tell you automatically. This technology saved lives. Especially in rural areas where people might not have access to TV or might be working outside. And perhaps most importantly, the concept of spotter networks was born. See, here's the thing about radar. Even modern Doppler radar, it has limitations. Radar can detect rotation in the atmosphere. It can see precipitation. It can give meteorologists clues about what's happening. But it can't always tell you definitively, there is a tornado on the ground right now, and it's heading this direction. You need eyes, human eyes, trained observers who can look at the storm and report what they see. So, the National Weather Service, working with emergency management agencies, started recruiting and training volunteers, regular people, farmers, teachers, firefighters, weather enthusiasts, people who loved storms and wanted to help. They called them sky-worn spotters. These spotters would take classes, learn about storm structure, learn what to look for, rotation in the clouds, wall clouds, funnel clouds, debris clouds, and when severe weather threatened, they would go out, position themselves safely, and report what they saw. I see strong rotation in the wall clouds southwest of town. Funnel clouds spotted 2 miles west of Highway 41. Tornado on the ground moving northeast toward Main Street. These reports, these eyes on the storm, became critical to the warning process. Meteorologists would combine radar data with spotter reports to issue more accurate warnings, to give people more time to save lives. Today, the Skywarn program has over 250,000 trained spotters across the United States, volunteers, people who give their time, risk the storms to protect their communities. All of this, the watches and warnings, the sirens, the weather radios, the spotter networks, all of it was built on the ashes of Palm Sunday, 1965. The people who died that day, their deaths were not in vain. Their legacy is every person who survived a tornado since because they got a warning, because they heard a siren, because a spotter saw the tornado and reported it, because they had time. That's the legacy. That's the meaning pulled from the tragedy. So, with all of that, with the science, with the reforms, with the legacy, with the impact, why is the 1965 Palm Sunday outbreak forgotten? Why do so few people, even weather enthusiasts, know this story? It's a question that haunts me, that bothers me, because this wasn't some minor event. This wasn't a small outbreak. This was the 4th deadliest tornado outbreak in U.S. history. 4th. And yet, ask someone about tornado outbreaks, and they'll mention the 1974 super outbreak. 148 tornadoes in 24 hours. 330 deaths. It's legendary. In textbooks, documentaries, every weather nerd knows about it. Or they'll mention Joplin, Missouri, May 22nd, 2011. An EF5 tornado that killed 161 people and caused almost $3 billion in damage. That's recent. That's vivid. That's on YouTube in high definition. Or they'll mention the 2011 super outbreak. 362 tornadoes in 4 days, including the Tuscaloosa-Birmingham EF4 that was captured on live television. But 1965, silence. It's quiet. Almost invisible in the public consciousness. So why? Why has this outbreak faded? I've thought about this. A lot. And I think there are several reasons. First, timing. Historical context. The 1960s were a time of massive upheaval in America. The Vietnam War was escalating. Young men were being drafted, sent overseas, dying in jungles on the other side of the world. The civil rights movement was in full swing. Protests, marches, violence. The Voting Rights Act was passed just months after Palm Sunday. The space race was roaring. America was trying to beat the Soviets to the moon. Every rocket launch was front-page news. Cultural revolution. The Beatles, Bob Dylan, the counterculture emerging. So much was happening. So much was changing. A tornado outbreak in the Midwest, even one this deadly, got swallowed by the news cycle. It was covered, yes. It was on the front pages for a few days. But then, other stories took over. The news moved on, and in an era before the internet, before digital archives, before you could just Google something and find it, if the newspapers moved on, the story disappeared. Second, technology, documentation. In 1965, there were no camcorders in every home, no smartphones, no social media, no YouTube. The images from that day, they're mostly still photographs, black and white, grainy, powerful, yes, but limited. A few photos of the twin funnels, some aerial shots of the destruction, newspaper photos of survivors in shock. But compare that to modern tornado outbreaks. Joplin, Missouri, in 2011, the tornado was captured on dozens of videos from multiple angles in high definition, from helicopters, from storm chasers, from survivors trapped inside buildings. Those videos went viral. They were shared millions of times. They're burned into our collective memory. Visual documentation creates lasting memory. Without it, events fade. They become statistics, numbers on a page. Third, the communities themselves. Many of the towns hit hardest by the Palm Sunday outbreak were small, rural, Goshen, Indiana, population maybe 15, 20,000. Dunlap, a small community, Pittsfield, Ohio, 50 people. These weren't major cities. These weren't places with national media presence. They rebuilt, they mourned, they moved forward. Because what else could they do? But they didn't have the resources or the platforms to keep the story alive on a national scale. There are memorials. In Dunlap, Indiana, there's a memorial park, a quiet place, trees, benches, a stone monument with the names of the dead etched into its surface. Every year, on April 11th, survivors and their families gather there. They remember, they grieve, they honor the lost. But outside those communities, outside the Midwest, the memory has dimmed, faded like an old photograph left in the sun, and maybe, just maybe, there's a fourth reason: trauma. Sometimes, the people who lived through something that horrific don't want to talk about it. They want to move on. They want to heal. They want to forget. Because remembering hurts. Remembering means reliving, means feeling that terror again, that helplessness, that loss. And when the survivors don't speak, when they keep their stories locked inside, when they die without passing them on, the memory dies with them. But here's the thing. The thing I want you to understand, we can't let it die. We can't let this story disappear. Because the lessons of Palm Sunday, the warnings written in blood, they're just as relevant today as they were 60 years ago. Let me ask you a question, right now, watching this. If a tornado outbreak like Palm Sunday happened today, in 2025, would you be ready? Would your community be ready? The answer is more complicated than you might think. On one hand, yes, absolutely yes. We have technology that would have seemed like magic to someone in 1965. We have Doppler radar that can see inside storms, that can detect rotation at different altitudes, that can measure wind speeds, that can predict tornado formation with incredible accuracy. We have dual polarization radar that can detect debris lofted by tornadoes, giving us confirmation that a tornado is on the ground, even if no spotter can see it. We can issue warnings with 10, 15, sometimes 20 minutes of lead time. That's 20 minutes to get your family to the basement, to grab your emergency kit, to save your life. In 1965, they had minutes, sometimes seconds, sometimes nothing. We have smartphones that send instant alerts directly to your pocket. You don't even need to be watching TV or listening to the radio. Your phone will scream at you. Tornado warning, take shelter now. We have meteorologists on TV, on YouTube, on TikTok, on live streams, explaining what's happening in real time, showing you the radar, telling you exactly where the tornado is and where it's going. We have storm chasers with high-definition cameras providing live video of tornadoes, giving people visual confirmation, making it real. We have helicopters, drones, a whole network of eyes on the sky. So, yes, we're better prepared, much better. But, and this is a big, but, are we really ready? Because here's what I see. Here's what terrifies me. We've gotten complacent. How many times have you, personally, gotten a tornado warning on your phone and ignored it? Oh, it's probably nothing. Warnings get issued all the time, and nothing happens. It's not going to hit my neighborhood. I'm sure it'll miss us. I'll just keep an eye on it. That complacency, it kills people. Every single year, people die in tornadoes because they didn't take the warning seriously, because they didn't have a plan, because they thought